creation of any piece of artwork always exists two battling perspectives. That of the artist, and that of the observer. Asking either camp the question, what is the purpose of art? And you'll likely hear a very different answer from each side. To enjoy, to interpret, to observe and understand, says the observer. Well, to express and to understand oneself, says the artist. Does art even need to be observed by anybody for it to serve its purpose?
The point isn't finding some answer to the question, but instead to understand and think about the perspective of those who make things. And I don't think I've ever played a game that has dived into that idea more effectively than this masterpiece of a puzzle game called Lorelei and the Laser Eyes. I've been playing this one for about the past month or so, and man, it's been scooping some seriously interesting ideas into my brain. But on top of that, I really do think this is sincerely one of the coolest puzzle slash mystery detective games I've ever played. Right now I'm working on this really big new Yume Nikki video, and it's gotten way too huge, so I'm definitely not finishing it this month like I wanted to, but I gotta pay rent, so I gotta get something out. So for now, you're gonna listen to me ramble about Lorelei and the Laser Eyes. Hopefully that's cool, but I think it will be, because this is a really cool game and I really want to share it with people. I first saw this one back in that Nintendo Indie World Showcase back in May, and this was the one game out of the whole thing that stood out to me the most by a mile. I mean, partially because of how freaking stylish and weird and abstract it looked, but also because it had those survival horror fixed camera angles, and that, you know me, that tickles my brain like nothing else. So that had me on board already. And I was still thinking about it, and then it came out, and I was debating getting it, so I thought to hop over to the Steam reviews. Like, what do people think of this thing? And I was seeing people throw the word masterpiece at it left, right, and center. People were saying it's this surreal, abstract, amazing, cool puzzle game that was just so different than everything else. Everything comes together so well. Apparently the story is nuts too. Like they were saying, you actually solve a real murder by the end of it. Yo, combining the mystery stuff of games like LA Noire, Hotel Dusk, I love that sort of thing, and the style of fixed angle survival horror, this sounded like a match made in heaven, so I decided to pick it up. But first I thought I should probably check my email to see if they sent me a review code, because that happens sometimes. And hey, I got lucky. There was one in my inbox. Thank you. Everybody at Annapurna, I guess, sent that out. Good publisher too. Annapurna actually published my favorite game of all time, Outer Wilds. And they do seem to have a really good track record for picking up like actually really interesting and unique games. As for the actual developer, it was by Simogo, which is a Swedish independent developer, which you may know for a similarly stylish game called Sayonara Wild Hearts, amongst many more. Oh, I was so excited that morning to download this to the Switch, and yeah, after playing it for a good while now, I can easily say it 100% lives up to those Steam reviews. So the premise here is you are this artist named Lorelei who's invited to this big mansion out in the middle of nowhere. And you get the vibe that something's kind of not going right. You get the vibe the guy inviting you there is a little weird. I mean, he's this eccentric filmmaker named Renzo, and he's interested in the very strange abstract art that Lorelei has created, and he just wants to collaborate with her. So here she is at the mansion, and very quickly things just become a Resident Evil game with no combat. There's no shooting, there's no action, there's no anything. You only use one button and a stick to play this entire game. Stick moves you around, and any button interacts / opens the menus. If there's nothing to click on, it'll open the menu, and then yeah, you're still using one button to go through these menus. And there's something so interesting about making like a fairly complex puzzle game, but when it comes to the controls, they're like, no, as simple as possible. And there's a number of reasons why that makes it really cool, but we'll get into that after. With the fixed angles and everything, I almost expected this game to have tank controls, and I'm sure most people will be happy to hear it doesn't. You do just push the stick the way you want to walk, but that does come with some hurdles when you have fixed angles. I've seen a variety of control problems with that over the years, as well as a variety of solutions too, and Lorelei employs a similar tactic to Eternal Darkness on GameCube. And I don't mean like the camera angles transition without a cut, they still do cut, but they do still carefully pick angles that smoothly flow into one another without interrupting your controls, which is great because I hate when you have to jam the stick all around as the angles change. Not really a whole lot you can do in this mansion yet. There's locked doors everywhere. Things may not have gotten rusty, but all doors are locked, and in order to unlock these doors, of course, you're going to have to solve a whole bunch of puzzles. Now, when I say puzzles, I'm not talking sliding blocks or interacting with like weird little mechanisms or anything. I'm talking about the kind you would expect from a survival horror game where you're reading a whole lot of newspapers, magazines, articles. You got a lot of reading material, and you have to infer clues from that reading material and try to turn that into some sort of answer that you will use to open some door somewhere in the mansion. This could be figuring out the date something happened with some simple math, or maybe thinking outside the box a little bit. There's actually quite a bit of simple math in this game. Don't get too intimidated by that. There's nothing you can't quickly do with a calculator. In fact, they actually bundle a calculator into the game because they know you're doing math. There's actually a lot of different concepts you will have to be aware of in order to get through this game. Like, you'll have to know about Roman numerals and zodiac symbols, but one thing this game is really good at is absolutely every concept you need to be at least somewhat familiar with to get through this game. You will be able to find a book that explains that to you. So like, say you're not so great with something like Roman numerals, you can just find a book that just goes, hey, this is what they are, this is how they work. If you ever see these things, you can just open this back up for a quick reference. It's kind of like an open book test. Almost every answer will be somewhere in something you read, and just at your fingertips, neatly organized, easy to go through. You can look at every single thing you've seen so far, thanks to Lorelei's photographic memory. And this might sound overwhelming. It's like, hey, here's 100 articles, look for the answer, idiot. It sounds like it would just be a whole lot of rereading, but they are so good at making everything memorable, everything so different from each other, that you are actually going through like a detective and you're drawing connections. You always know where to look in your notes first. Never feels like you're just going through a million things hoping to find a clue somewhere. Oh, one thing that's really cool is the way they do shortcuts. So you can find this one puzzle book that just has a whole bunch of puzzles. Every page is just a puzzle, and you can think of the answer, but it's like, what do I do with this answer? So you're finding all of these optional locked doors throughout the mansion, and every one has a number on it. That number corresponds to the page in the book. So if you solve, like, say you find a certain number door and it's like, okay, flip to the page in the book, this puzzle, the answer to this puzzle, the 2-digit number I get for answering this puzzle, that will open this door. So there's all these optional puzzles. These are usually the harder ones. There's all these optional puzzles that just make it easier to get around if you happen to solve them, which is like, that's a really cool reward because you don't have to do these and you tell yourself, okay, I don't know what this means. I'm just gonna go around this. But then you go all the way around like for the 4th time, and at one point you're like, okay, screw it. I'm figuring out what these boxes mean. I'm figuring out what these boxes mean because I want this door to be open. And you look at it for the 7th time, and it just makes sense. You just see the answer. It's that kind of game. You keep revisiting stuff that you didn't quite get, and you will see it eventually. It's never like too cryptic. It's always just cryptic enough. And that's when we get into the game's brilliant structure. Like, the pacing here is really, really good. Actually reminds me of The Witness, where there's a lot of stuff you're walking around. It's like, I don't know what this is, but you can just go somewhere else and try something else first. And then maybe if your brain's kind of in the right mood, when you look at it again later, then it makes sense. Lorelei is a lot like that. There's never one thing you're trying to do. There's always multiple things, so you can wander around and, you know, something might not make sense at first, but then you go to something else, you figure those things out. And then once your brain has just kind of got the cogs going, the gears moving a little bit more, you're greasing the wheels up there just from solving more puzzles, you come back to stuff and it's like, okay, now I need to open this. Oh, but I'm seeing something now I didn't before. Or maybe you'll even have more context because you read another article you found somewhere else that you didn't know before. And I hope I didn't make these puzzles seem like they're just numbers and math shit, because you do have to think about the information in so many interesting ways. Like I said, they teach you many fun concepts, and you may have to employ any one of them to interpret the answer correctly. This is the kind of game that will make you bust out a pen and paper, whether you're arranging symbols, or maybe just putting it into a visual so you can think about it more practically. This is actually, no exaggeration, the single most a game has ever made me do this. Well, okay, other than maybe Professor Layton, but that game gives you the touchscreen to do it, that doesn't count. This is the most amount of physical notes I've ever taken for a game in my life, and I mean that in the best way. Like, this was totally unreal how fun this was. And you can't have a game about exploring a mansion and doing puzzles and having fixed camera angles without finding a whole bunch of weird objects and using those as keys in some way. You'll be doing that a whole lot too. One of my favorite puzzles involving this was you found these little baby baby blocks with letters on them, and then you have to insert those blocks. You get like 4 or 5 of them, and then you go to a painting, and then the painting has a name with one block, one letter removed. But you might have to infer that letter not as like the letter it is, but as a piece of another letter depending on the typeface they use to spell the name. That's a good way to describe the puzzles in this game, actually. Like, if there's ever a time where it feels like, okay, I've done something like this in a game before, they always go one step further that makes you go, okay, that was really cool. Some of the coolest parts of this game, though, is when you're inferring clues not just from reading material, but reading material inside vintage video games. There's like this whole point-and-click adventure game that you have to play a couple of times, walking through in first person, and then you find something that's going to be a clue as to what to do in the mansion in the real world. Even cooler, though, is like the PS1 version of Lorelei and the Laser Eyes that you play. That's like a game you play in the universe of the game. And like I said, this game doesn't have tank controls. It looks like it's going to be tank controls, and it's not. But then this game is. That was a fun little surprise. I like my tank controls. If you hate them, don't worry, you'll only have to put up with them in these like tiny little game segments. And it's like freaky. You're like finding glitches in the game, and like the history of like the record of what those glitches were. That ends up being a password in something else too. Everything is a clue. Everything goes everywhere. Like this whole game is interconnected in like a million cool ways. I love that you even see the controller on this game console, and it's the controls to the game. It's just a D-pad and one button, and based on even that clue, like that's a clue too, because you find instructions and it's like, what could these possibly mean? But it's like that controller only had these inputs, so maybe these are inputs? You just figured out something new. I swear this game is like brute force proof as well. I guess the shortcut doors, you could type in every number from 0 to 99 to open the shortcuts. It would take ages though, because the way they have these animations spacing out the time it takes, so that it would just be too draining to even really do that. But since you're inferring direct information from stuff, they're able to make what you're actually punching in just so loose and have so many buttons that it would actually probably be totally impossible just to guess by trial and error. And I like that, because it never ever feels like there's a moment where I solved a puzzle and I didn't know why. It always feels like I know what I did. One thing that is also really nice about this game is just how good they are at cataloging absolutely everything you come by, and not just the notes and articles and stuff for quick reference. I'm talking also the objectives. Every important thing you will need to interact with at some point will be written down once you find it, and they'll check it off too once you're done with it. So if you're ever finding yourself having a hard time figuring out what should I do next, just take a quick look through your notes and you'll find a new lead before you know it. The maps are also a great help too. What's a fixed angle game full of puzzles without incorporating maps into the gameplay? Finding these will require solving a puzzle each. It's another thing that you'll find yourself coming back to a number of times before maybe getting it. And like the shortcuts, these maps are also optional, but they're so helpful that they end up being a really fantastic reward for some of the optional puzzles. Now, while there's no combat or any sense of real danger in the game, for the most part, sometimes there will be a chaser spawned in. It actually reminds me a lot of Yume Nikki. Like, the only thing that can happen is one of these guys grabbing you. This will happen later into the game. These guys will randomly spawn in. Also reminds me of like the ghost from Silent Hill 4. And if one catches you, you'll be warped to this interrogation room held at gunpoint. Now, these moments are different than the other puzzles. You're not reading anything. Instead, you're put in a 3D environment and just simply asked to observe. And once you feel like you have a good grasp on what's around you, just go, okay, sure, I'll remember that. Then it'll be like, all right, how many chess pieces were on the chessboard, or how many books were on the floor? And it's like, what? How? Okay. This is the one part of the game I think is a little silly. It feels kind of arbitrary just to be like, hey, here's a memory game. If your memory's good or bad, you just win or lose. It doesn't really feel like I did something, and, you know, when you die, you're just gonna reload your save file, which you did right before, hopefully, so it doesn't really, I don't know, it feels like fake stakes. It's still fun stylistically though, like when you're at the interrogation room and the guy's got the gun at you and all these cool shots and the way it's so high contrast and the lighting and everything, and the music is so cool. And that goes into the story too. Like, what you're looking at here has implications of what's really happening in this weird world. And you eventually begin to realize that the reason everything is so strange and surreal and abstract is because all of these events aren't really happening as literally as you think originally. It's more like memories being explored through an interrogation. You ever watch Oppenheimer? How that movie repeats scenes a lot in a way that it just feels like we're going through his brain, we're just seeing his life, his memories of his life, and the way things repeat, it's almost like you're thinking about it again and again until you get an extra clue and things make sense. That's what the gameplay feels like, and that's what the art, the visuals, the sound, that's what the game itself feels like too. It feels like one big memory that you're sifting through to find the answers. There was a murder in this mansion a long time ago, and they're trying to figure out what the hell happened because they cannot explain what happened. All we know is that a lot of eccentric artists gathered here to make something big, weird, and artsy, and that a lot of them had this frustration with the world surrounding the art that we make. The eccentric filmmaker you go to meet there, Renzo, has this really interesting perspective where he hates money. Like, he thinks the concept of economics has basically destroyed art as we know it, because he used to make films whatever he wanted. But now that he has to get funding for films and that controls what he's able to make, he hates that. He hates that you have to make things for other people and not for yourself.
And he's also somebody that finds a lot of frustration with people not really getting what he's trying to get across and views it as either pretentious or nonsensical or just trying to be shocking. And all of this has stirred in his mind into the most evil thing like possible. Like, listen to this. We must make special cinemas for showing movies that transcend the human experience and shift the perspective from the viewer. Such a cinema has no need for chairs or popcorn, and it has no room or need for people at all. A projectionist starts the film and is given ample time to vacate before the credits. Then the show begins. No chatter, no commercials, no inane questions about the plot. Pure cinema. Untarnished by greedy eyes. This dude wants a world where art exists for itself and nobody gets to see it because they're bastards and they don't deserve it. They're greedy. It's like evil, right? But you can't pretend like you don't get where he's coming from, you know what I mean?
Which is where that perspective and that dumb little intro that I started this video with came from. It's just like a really interesting theme that really gives you a lot to think about, but it also serves as like this really sinister motive for like the mystery of what's happening, like the thing that you're trying to figure out what happened. It's gargantuan, it's cosmic, it's messed up, and it's totally buyable because these frustrations are so relatable. Like, there's just so much that doesn't add up, and the more it doesn't add up, the more it does add up. You just have to sacrifice the way you think about things so logically. There's like one piece of logic you have to throw out the window at a point, but when it's like finding out what that rule is, you know, because it's a piece of fiction. And I was taught in film school that when you want something to be buyable, you get one weird thing. You know, it's like, oh, this movie is vampires. That's the one weird thing. If you just put aliens in halfway through, suddenly you're gonna lose people. You're trying to figure out what that one weird rule of this fictional universe is. And when you get that, everything suddenly comes together, but they don't really tell you for a long time. I figured it out about halfway through the game, and suddenly my brain was exploding. The color red is also thematically tied to this concept of influence, the negative influences that we have to make art around, that kind of spoils it. Because at first you just think, okay, it's black and white, but the blood's red. Never seen that before. But it goes a couple extra steps beyond that. At a point you realize none of this is blood, like that's not what this is supposed to be at all, and it's really fascinating. Anyway, I'm kind of talking pretty loose about this to avoid spoilers because it is such a mystery you want to solve yourself, believe me. But there is all these ties to what's called the maze, and you don't know if the maze is literal or thematic, and it really does feel like, yeah, it's the artist just lost, wandering around the same halls until something clicks, you know? Lorelei goes to Renzo hoping to make this big art project, but she has no direction, she doesn't know what to do, she's lost. The art of the life of an artist is a maze. And incorporating that in the gameplay too, having a literal maze as one of the levels, and it gets harder to navigate the more you take from it. But once you get things in that maze, you can then go back to the mansion and use it there. And there's also a second maze, which is the same maze, except you explore it over the shoulder, and now there's all these guys that you can do these puzzles, and they're gunpoint puzzles, but these are not like the interrogation ones. These are actual open book report puzzles where you don't even get multiple choice. You don't even get to click on stuff. You have to type in the word. And if you type in the wrong word, bullet between the eyes. I like these ones a lot more. The stakes feel bigger, and it feels like you actually have to be on the right page and be paying attention to following along the plot, but also just like, it's also cool because it kind of feels like a key to a door, because you need the right page you found somewhere in the mansion to answer this question. So you're looking through and it's like, I don't know if I have that one. Let's go to a different part of the maze. Okay, this guy, he's got me at gunpoint. He's asking about this. Well, I remember that guy's name. We'll go to that page. Oh, there it is. You got the answer. Whole new part of the maze.
Oh, and the reason the stakes feel a lot bigger is because, yeah, sure, you can just reload a save file, but then you gotta go all the way back through the maze again. So, like, there's at least something you don't want to have to repeat.
This is one of those games where, like, gameplay, themes, storytelling, and the mystery all woven together in one perfect spiral. Like, every time you're solving a puzzle, it also tells you a little bit more about the characters, their motives, why they were feeling the way they did, why they did the things they did, and what years these events took place. And that's when things stop making sense, is when you realize that, like, things you thought were connected happened 100 years apart, but then it's like, then you have to completely change the way you think they're connected. It's so cool. This is such a good mystery. It's such a good mystery, and it feels like you actually solve it. It feels like you actually have to solve it yourself. No multiple choice, no clicking on stuff, no, like, reloading a save until you get it right. You gotta know what happened. And again, that might sound intimidating, but they're so good at having all the information you need. It's never too cryptic, but just enough that you get to feel like a real, genuine detective. This game's made me feel like an actual detective more than L.A. Noire ever could. That's why, like, I do love that game, but I want games that can really make you feel like a detective, and Lorelei, best one I've played so far. And this thing's got all the style of a Suda51 game, dude. It really reminds me of one of my favorite looking games ever, Killer 7 back on GameCube. Still one of the coolest games ever made, and this game takes a more like film noir approach to that. Again, there's the black and white, but there's also like textures of newspapers filling the screen. It's like, yes, these are memories, these are articles, these are clipping. Everything is thematically connected to what the gameplay is and like what you're doing here. And on top of that, it looks so cool. I love the glitchy effects, like the incorporation of like when the color red is present and it's like in the form of almost like a glitch, like a glitch in the memory, the influence. Remember, red is influence. You get the red computer screens, the whirring of the old-timey computers when you save your game, the redness of the maze, and of course, the laser eyes themselves. What are they for and what do they mean? I love all the stylish little quick shots, like when you open your inventory, you get a real quick shot of her opening her bag, and all those little glitchy transitions makes all like the menu navigation really seamless and cool. It's a remarkably cool looking thing, and it, you know, when something looks this cool, that gets you on board. Always disappointing to play it and like the substance doesn't live up to the style. This is not that case at all. The substance and the style are both like 10 out of 10 here. And they come together too. You need them both to work together in a meaningful way, and Lorelei does that super well.
And the music in this game is an absolute treat. It's jazzy, it's moody, it can be erratic, and it can be ambient. It got deep strings and bass, somber surf guitar, conveying a mood of like dissatisfaction against the odds and the struggle to understand how to coexist with the rules at play. Other times it's upbeat, you know, you got the curious celebration of mystery, magic, and trivia as you wander the crimson hallways of the high-stakes puzzle club. And the floating wash that comes with each video game prototype, it is the stuff of dreams. The music is so perfectly intertwined with the emotions and the themes this game wants you to think about. They characterize each person in the story so well with just a series of moods that may be playful, maybe mysterious, maybe lost and confused.
I'll see it all through laser eyes.
All these different mediums of self-expression, they also take shape of the puzzles themselves. Renzo loved filmmaking, for example, so hey, here's a camera. Line up the perspective and find out a clue. There's a painter, so here's an old piece she made, maybe it means something. Lorelei loved making puzzle boxes, so those will be a thing here too. Or again, maybe you're sifting through old software code, hoping to find something useful.
Well, I guess I pretty much covered everything. That's at least everything I can think to say about it off the cuff, off the top of my head with no script right now, at least. But yeah, I really freaking recommend this game to anybody who loves puzzle games. And I don't mean like Tetris shit, I mean like detective stuff like Hotel Dusk or L.A. Noire. Professor Layton would be a good one, I think a better example, because that's more like brain teaser stuff and inferring clues from reading stuff. If you like Professor Layton and detective stuff in general, you should play this game. Phoenix Wright, if you like Phoenix Wright, you should play Lorelei. And also if you're a big fan of like the kind of Suda51 surrealism, like No More Heroes or Killer 7, Killer Z, all that stuff, I think those people should also play this thing, because you get that style. You get some of the most polished, coolest version of that style yet, and then you get a really amazing mystery that's as challenging as it is easy to get into right behind it. Biggest thing I think you should take away though is, again, it seems intimidating, but everything is there and you will notice it eventually. You might have to come back to it a couple of times, maybe think about things in a different way, but it's not that hard to beat the game without a walkthrough as long as you're patient and you just reread things a lot. But again, it doesn't feel draining rereading everything, because when you reread things, you also learn more about the mystery and the story, and it's just so fun to do it. I don't know how they did it this good, but they did. I guess I'll end on what I think the laser eyes are, thematically at least. I mean, it is like this mystical thing in the history that you will learn about, but thematically I kind of see the laser eyes as like the perspective of like the artist being forced to view their own work through the eyes of thinking about money and thinking about influence and thinking about what it will mean to other people, instead of having the not laser eyes, which is your own eyes, which is just seeing what it means to you, the artist. I think if you're the kind of person who's ever made stuff, or you're an artist or whatever, you're going to relate to this game hard freaking core. Steam reviews called this a masterpiece. I'm inclined to agree. So yeah, check it out if you like mystery stuff. Lorelei and the Laser Eyes is available on, I think it's just on Switch and Steam right now. No worries about the Switch version. I know some people get Switch port anxiety, but I played through it on Switch. That's the version I played. Runs perfectly clean, perfect 60 FPS, it looks beautiful, there's no sacrifices to the graphics at all. It feels exactly the same as if you were playing it on a nice PC. So get it on Switch and have no worries about it. If it instills any confidence, all of the footage you've seen of the game in this video, it was all from the Switch version. But yeah, I guess that's all I really got to say about it. Please check out Lorelei and the Laser Eyes. It's an incredible game. Oh, it'll probably take you about like between 10 and 20 hours to beat, depending on how good you are at solving stuff. I think it took me around 13 hours, maybe even shorter if you're really good at if you have a better memory. I think the better your memory is, the faster you'll get through this thing. But yeah, incredible game. I recommend it to anybody who likes mystery and surreal stuff. I'm repeating myself in this sentence, and this sentence is kind of me repeating myself anyway. I just gotta end this video. Check out Lorelei, Laser Eyes. See you next time with something different. I don't know. Goodbye.
I'm gonna see the world through my laser eyes. I'm gonna see the world through my laser eyes. I'll see it through the laser. Red eyeballs, why they like that? Who fucking knows? Laser eyes gonna kill you.
Laser Eyes Orbital Strike!